Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Hey, well, welcome to the Advantage Podcast today, and real happy to have as my guest Mr. Les McKeown. Les has become a friend, but also has been a great mentor from maybe afar for me and in a lot of churches around Pennsylvania. So Les, thank you, first of all, for joining us today. Appreciate it very much.
Absolute pleasure to be here, David.
So as we've already mentioned, Les has done a lot of things, and Les, I'd love to have you kind of share a little bit of your history. But the way I came across you was first hearing you, I think it maybe was at the Rethink conference, probably 15 years or so ago in Atlanta. You were speaking there. That's the first time I ever heard you talk about the idea, the concept of predictable success. And when you shared it, fell in love with it, and thought, man, this makes total sense. And so I delved into the book and have had numerous opportunities then to hear you explain it further, but love that concept. And so again, appreciate what you've been able to do to help me, help LCBC over the years. It's been very helpful to us. So.
It's been a wonderful journey for me too. And, you know, having had the opportunity, we've talked about this before, for me to meet you and get involved with you just at the point where that transition was beginning to happen, something that gets fumbled so often. And you just watch it being handled and done with such grace and so skillfully. That's been a pleasure, you know, just seeing you do the handover to Jason at LCBC, and of course moving on to the other things that you're involved in now. So it's been a mutual benefit and pleasure.
Good. I appreciate that. So just so everybody knows, when Les mentioned kind of the transition between myself and Jason, as the board was looking at ways to help Jason make sure he was prepared for the future, one of the things that they felt like, just because we had grown to be such a large organization, is Jason not having a lot of opportunity to lead an organization that size. And so we actually enrolled Jason in one of Les's, I guess it was more of a CEO group, wasn't it? A group of business leaders. But we thought him rubbing shoulders with those business leaders for a year would be fantastic. And so appreciate you letting us jump in on that one.
It was great. It was great to have Jason along. And, you know, one of the things, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but as I've been doing what I've been doing for decades now, for me, I have a weird acronym I use. I think about the MSE, the most senior executive, and it's sort of neutral to me, whether it's a for-profit, a not-for-profit, big, small, manufacturing, whatever it is. My real heart is with the folks that are carrying, you know, the leading edge of that. So I just think about MSEs, most senior executives, and, you know, what their day-to-day title is.
Yeah.
The challenges are very, very similar.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. And I would agree from my experience. So that's great. So let's talk a little bit about your history real quick. Obviously, your accent, you're not from the South. And so give us a little bit of history real quick of where you're from.
I've been here 30 years, but my accent has decided not to fully relocate. I grew up in Ireland, in Belfast. I tell people Belfast is the place in Ireland you come from, and I came from Belfast. If you have any sense, you go to Dublin, a much prettier part of the world. Grew up just a working class kid, and weirdly in my mid-teens, got fascinated with just the world of work. I don't know why. My father he was just a jobber. He just took jobs wherever he wanted. Every now and again, he would have an office-based job, and that sort of intrigued me to go in and watch and see. And I would watch shops, you know, stores open up and close and wonder, why does this store do well? That one didn't do well. Long story short, it turned out eventually, 20 years later, I found out I'm interested in watching groups try to achieve common goals, and business was just the easiest way for me to see that. So my first ever mentor, a wonderful man, still with us, Jim Johnson, said, you know, you're obviously fascinated by this. Go become a solicitor, an attorney, or an accountant, a CPA, because you want to get something you can fall back on and be trained to understand business. Became a CPA, did quite well, set out my own shingle, you know, started my own practice. And just at the time I did it, there was a huge push to entrepreneurship in the UK. Money was being poured into new ventures like there was no tomorrow. And the reason was we were a branch economy of the US and South Korea, actually. So if LG, you know, Lucky Gold Star or Ford caught a cold, we would lose 15,000 jobs in Liverpool or somewhere. It's just enormous entrepreneurial push came along, and I just got swept up in it. I started to, quotes, advise people. Ridiculous. They were kind enough to let me advise them. And folks would come to me, and I got to cherry pick essentially 6 to 8 businesses, and they were all for-profits back then, or mostly, where they would ask me to become part of the founding team. And on a 10-year period, I was part of launching over 40 businesses. And like David, even a dumb Irishman is going to see patterns if you do something over and over
Yeah,
again. I began to see some recurring patterns. I thought I could see an arc developing of how businesses, as it was then, all for profit in my head, grew. But I couldn't quite work out in the world I was living in the UK, what happened with really large organizations. And I had a notion I would know what was happening in the decline stage. Got the opportunity, 1999, the millennium, just as the millennium was turning, to come over here, settled in the West Coast, and had a fantastic opportunity through a contact I had there to work with huge organizations, just to sit with them, watch the teams work, ask any questions. By about, I'll finish with this, by about 2010, I had this model of what I saw happening fully formed. And my then darling ex-wife, now ex-wife, said, you're either going to have to write this book or stop talking about it. So I wrote the book, Predictable Success, got published in 2010. And since then, all I've done is teach this model of predictable success and work with leaders in trying to implement it, helping people navigate the roadmap of growth for organizations.
Well, what you do well, Les, and what I appreciate about you, among many things, is you not only had that experience with so many organizations, but you were able to, and you made it sound like it's easy, but to find those trends, to be able to put words to those trends. And so that's what was so fun for me as I read the book was, oh my goodness, I've experienced that. I've felt that before. I just didn't know how to say it or put
Right.
words to it. And so you're good at that. And so that's much appreciated from my standpoint. And then you also, you were successful in your own right from a business standpoint. So you weren't just looking at others, but you were successful that way as well.
Yeah, those businesses, you know, none of them were Google, none of them became Facebook, but I had a tool, and I was one of the 3 partners in a tool and die manufacturing company making the dies to make tools. Now in Western Europe and North America, you probably couldn't start a business like that. That trend's shifting a little bit now, thank goodness. But I had the master license for Pizza Hut in Ireland. We built out 30 Pizza Huts. So yeah, I did it. I lived it. We launched the first private hospital in Ireland, which was that was a genuine and unique experience. So it was all what I call dirty fingernail learning. I wasn't, no interns were used or harmed in the development of the model. It was all, as you say, me just putting, I think I do 2 things well. One, I find the right word or phrase to describe what we've all experienced, but in a way that people can immediately say, yeah, that's it, Whitewater, that's what that was that I was experiencing. But that doesn't mean anything, we maybe might get to it. But I think the other thing that I've been able to do just by pure repetition and hanging in there long enough is to connect some dots. So occasionally there's this thing A that that you do know, and I put a name to it. And then there's thing C that I'll put a name to it. But there can often be connections between those. And it's just mining those connections. How does the domino effect of making this decision impact our growth 2 years from now? And we'll maybe talk about some practical applications of that.
Yeah, that's great. So you talk a lot about entrepreneurs. So part of why I think what you talk about, Les, applies so well to pastors, and that's who we're talking to today, is pastors in some ways are entrepreneurs, at least a lot of them, where they may start the church
Very much
or
so.
they'll come in when it's smaller and they're able to grow the church, but then they start bumping up against obstacles. And so maybe let's not go all the way through the predictable success model, but let's at least start it. And so you'll describe several different stages, and you mentioned being able to put words to different stages or things that are going on. And so I know you start out with just kind of the early
Struggle.
trials, or yeah. And so maybe talk a little bit about, for sure, up to Whitewater, because I think that's what most guys experience right now.
Right. So the genesis of any organization, whether it's a church for profit, and I should say as an aside that when I was writing the whole model and doing all that stuff back in Ireland, I was an elder and probably then the fastest growing church in Northern Ireland. You've been there, and not Northern Ireland, but you've been through that aspect of things. So it should not have been a surprise to me that just after the book was launched, I started to get pinged by pastors. And now, these days, about 40 to 45% of the work that I do is in the cause and faith-based world.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So the
Do
genesis
you enjoy that?
very much so. Yes.
Good. Yeah.
Yes. There's particular challenges about finding the right terminology that I liken doing my for-profit work with my church-based work with doing my for-profit work in Minnesota, because you just got to be aware of the fact that the direct challenge function is a little different than if you're with a marketing company in the East Coast or the West Coast, you know. So, but
That's funny. Yeah, and we've got our own terminology, and then we've got our hangups where we don't want to sound like we're a business, and so we've got to be careful. And so
right,
yeah,
which is all. I love the intellectual challenge of all of that, but my heart is with people who start businesses, which is where we began, who start ventures, and you know, a church starts the same way that a business does. Somebody wants to do this thing, and it's almost always somebody who's actually in a position that's pretty secure and okay. Right? Folks who are back against the wall tend not to launch successful activities. They do it because they have to, and that doesn't mean they have the skill set. So here we have somebody, they're what I call in my terminology the visionary. You know, doesn't mean they're up mountains, you know, having visions, though maybe sometimes they do, but they've just got the vision for this thing and they want to start it. They're typically risk takers, and they're stepping into something that's got a high failure rate. And so they get into this first stage, which I call early struggle. And I refuse to use the phrase, the startup phase, because that's been so beautified over the last 20 years. Being a startup is so good, so wonderful. It's so hip, it's so vogue, and it's not, it's horrible. And the only strategy for a startup is to stop being one, because otherwise it will eventually kill you. And the whole thing has been distended by these hero stories from the tech world, which is its own separate, overfinanced, artificial, don't get me started. In the real world, we start something, our new church, and we're under existential threat. We've got 7 people, 2 of whom are only there because they're scared to say, no, I'm not joining with you, but they're...
The other 5 happen to be family members, so...
Yes,
yeah.
And, you know, if somebody's sick one morning, it just... You know, oh my goodness. I mean, I've been literally there. So we have early struggle. It's typically a 3-ish year period of existential grief. You're just trying to get momentum, to get going, to begin to get some traction. And during that time, it's part of the, you know, the challenge of terminology. You've got to pay the bills. Hard to change the world if you can't pay the bills. In the world that we choose to live in a capitalist environment, that's the equation. And so we're doing all of that stuff. And what it means is for the percentage of folks who get through early struggle, and what is that? It means you turn up one day, you see that you're past early struggle in the rearview mirror. You don't see it coming towards you. What happens is one Monday you're thinking, I'm not worrying about that stuff anymore.
Okay.
We have momentum. It's like, I'm never fearful about a quorum. We've always got enough people. And you realize it's been 2 months since I couldn't pay a bill. And
so it's kind of like you stop worrying about survival, and then you have opportunity to start dreaming about the future a little bit.
Correct. You're technically at that stage, in my terminology, you're in the stage I call fun, capital F-U-N. Highly technical phrase, the most technical of all the phrases, because although it's still, obviously we're going to have tough times, we're now at the point where we're not literally every day worrying about our survival. And so you start to be able to say yes to things, and boy, do we say yes to things.
And Les, can I just ask you real quick? So you mentioned in the early struggle phase that there's a high likelihood of not succeeding. So in the business world, the numbers that I would always hear is 4 out of 5 are going to fail. And I even hear the same in church world. Is that the number you hear, or what numbers do you hear?
I can say with a fair amount of confidence at this point, having, you know, worked in and around it for so long, it's around 80% now. In the for-profit world, then it fail. So 1 in 5 make it through. The reported numbers from, for example, the IRS are not so bad. They report a lower number, closer to the 2/3 level. But the thing, I know this from my years as a CPA, there's so many businesses fail before they even file with the IRS. They don't even get that far. So the actual number is 80% on an average year. And it gets worse in both booms and busts.
Okay.
It gets worse in booms because everybody thinks they can do it.
A lot of people jumping in. Yeah.
And it gets worse in busts for the reason we just talked about, which is a lot of people do it because it's the only option that they have. You know, a contractor gets put out of business, can't find any business anywhere. Home Depot isn't taking anybody else on. So that I'll have to start trying to do it myself. So I don't know any solid numbers. I'm not saying they don't exist, but I don't know solid numbers on the for-profit, on the church-based world. But I imagine it's lower, but it doesn't take away that existential grief that you're going through at the time.
Yeah, and I think the numbers are actually pretty close to what you see in the business world too. So I kind of cut you off in the fun stage, and you were starting to say in the fun stage, the tendency is to say yes to everything because you're trying to grab every opportunity you can. So
yeah, the other thing that's happened is, and this is probably the single biggest, most impactful thing in the entire growth stage up to what I call predictable success, is the visionary leader that started it is vindicated in their vision, right? And vindicated sounds like a negative phrase. I just mean it in its literal phrase, that they think this was the right thing to do.
Okay.
And in the for-profit world, people talk about the founder's gut, and there's this sense that my instincts were right. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, without even flushing it necessarily to the front of their own mind, the leader is beginning a journey that gets strengthened during fun, that their instinct is a key to the success here. And it's true. At that point in time, it's true. And so most of what fun is our visionary leader conducting a group of enablers. And I mean that in a neutral sense. I don't mean enabling something negative. There may be a group of people that at some point during the fun path, the growth path, gets called the leadership group, but they're not really. They're water carriers. They're water carriers for the visionary leader's vision. And that's how it should be. It shouldn't be different from that. You have a group in the early stages of fun who are challenging the leader, who are challenging the vision. The whole thing begins to collapse like a pie you took out of the oven too early. So what has to happen in fun is the now vindicated in their vision leader drives forward with that vision. They don't necessarily have to be brutal or harsh or anything, but they're focused. And the quote leadership group are water carriers for that vision. Now, there may be one or two who build some sweat equity and buy the ear of the leader and get listened to a little more, but they're still clearly the one to lead it. Everything is wonderful so far. And stop me anytime. But what happens?
Les, I was just going to say, that is so common in church world, where somebody comes in, they either start a church or they get a church moving, going in the right direction. They either start hiring staff or they bring volunteers, lay leaders around them. And I know for myself at LCBC, once we started feeling some momentum, it's like, okay, yes, we're going here, and you bring people around to carry out the work that needs to happen. But you do go off of your gut to some extent and say, it just feels like this is the way we ought to be going because I've had success so far. Let's keep going with my gut. And I would even say to our team, unless you can prove to me that my gut is wrong, if it's my gut against your gut, I'm going to go with my gut every time. So there is something about that gut leadership that's interesting in this phase.
Very much so. And part of the challenge from the church world, I'm just going to say it, we'll park it. If you want to come back to it's outside my pay grade, but it's still there, is in the church world, unlike the for-profit world, you've got right alongside that. In fact, part of that whole gut thing is what God told me.
Yeah.
Right. So God told me this, and God's talking to me in bigger letters than he's talking to you about this church, right? You can hear about God from this church, but the way I hear about this church from God, that's the headline, right? What you hear is maybe a paragraph down here, So there's that element of it
Yeah.
as well. And I'm not being negative about that. I understand it entirely. Here's when it starts. So this is all the way it should be. I'm not saying any of that should be changed. But what happens is the environment within which all of that a dynamic is happening, there's something happening around all of that, which is that every day, in a way that you can barely see most of the time, this is all just getting more complex. There's more happening. And in the early stages, that founding leader has eyeball control or understanding of just about almost everything. And certainly there isn't any big decision being made behind a door over there or in a Slack or email conversation over there that the founding leader isn't part of. And so their gut is also highly informed. The intuition is taking the data, crunching that, and coming out with these correct intuitive decisions. Now the data isn't all there, right? I said to for-profit people, do you remember when a board meeting was a ride up in the elevator, right? So just the right three people would arrive the same morning, and by the time they got out on the 13th floor, actually the decisions for the next quarter were made because they were there and all the information was in the elevator. Now we begin to move into the stage I call Whitewater, which is when the complexity has been building and building, more people, more services, more missions, more actual money to manage, is beginning to overwhelm the ability to make the right intuitive decision. But it hasn't overwhelmed at all the ability to make an intuitive decision, right?
Yeah.
So now we have that leader using the same model from before, and the results aren't coming through. It all begins to slow down. Feels a little bit like I put my foot on the gas pedal. The car's not going forward the way it is. And of course, it's a natural thing for the leader to think others aren't just not picking up. They're not picking this up the way we should. They're not, we're bigger now. They've got to be going faster. They've got to be doing this. They've got to be doing that. And we get to the point where, and this is perhaps in the world where I'm working with faith-based leaders, including church leaders, but also organizations that are just trying to help in some way in the world, where the founding leader is frustrated with the leadership group because they're not acting as leaders, but he or she has never treated them and they've never been expected to step up as real leaders. And in the majority of the cases, the other leaders as well are becoming equally frustrated with the senior leader because they want to be treated like leaders because they see the need. They're beginning to think she can't keep making decisions like this anymore because they don't get it. They don't get there's other stuff happening elsewhere. Now I see you're grinning like you might have recognized
I think this is where 95% of our churches are,
Right.
where you get to that point, you've had success, and what you just described as the leader not training other leaders behind them or allowing them to lead. I don't think, and you're not implying that that's a conscious decision that I'm not going to let them lead. It just kind of works out that way because it's more efficient and things that way. So it never was undermining the other people working with you. Just kind of that's just the way you fell into it. But I think what you're describing now is where most churches are and bumping up against what you're calling whitewater. And so that's why I think it's just so relevant what you're experiencing. And again, as the leader, your gut's been right up until this point, and you feel like, oh, it ought to still be right. But to your point, you just don't have all the information anymore because it's gotten too big. Or in your words, it's gotten too complex. And it's that complexity that causes the problems.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
And at that point,
Les, what would be some signs that you're in that whitewater? How do you know that that's where you are?
Well, I'm going to say this in a blunt way, and I'm going to ask everybody, those of you that are watching, look me in the eyes. I say this in genuine love. There's a saying, I'm sure you've heard it. If you meet a jerk in the morning, you met a jerk. If you meet jerks all day long, it might be that you're the jerk, right? If you've experienced frustration with one of your leadership team members in the morning, you've had frustration with one of your leadership team members in the morning. If you're constantly frustrated with your leadership team, you're the problem.
Interesting.
Not because you caused it, you're right. If we were to rewind, and I get into this discussion sometimes with folks who say, do you mean that like 2 years ago I should have started training these people to be better? No, because you'd have killed your momentum back then. All that's required is to recognize this is now a new world. We need to change the direction of travel. The direction of travel is, if I can put it succinctly, whether it's a founding pastor or a lead pastor, because you can have a change of leadership during that fun stage. Whoever is the top of the pyramid, put it that way, has got to move from being the person who solves every problem to being the person who builds the team that solves every problem.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, not to over egg it, and we may not have time to get there, your ultimate goal is to be the person who builds a team who build teams that solve problems. That's when you're, and those of us that are watching that are running large organizations, by which I mean probably more than 75 people or so. At that point, you need to be building the team who build teams who solve problems. But just making the move, because don't forget, one of the things that happened during all of that fun period, when you were the orchestrator, with your water carriers, you were quietly building the curse of knowledge, right? Because you know everything. And now you're at the point where you still think you know everything, but actually you don't. So you've got to start, the old saying, if I wanted a 75-year-old beautiful tree in my back garden, when was the best time to plant it? 75 years ago. What's the second best time to plant it? Today. Yeah. You've got to start today thinking of yourself more as a mentor and a coach and a team developer than being the Solomon who, okay, well, here's what we'll do. The problem-solving leader.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's hard to do because there's a feel good to everybody coming to you to solve the issues. And so coming to the point of realizing, I don't have all the answers. I remember the first time it happened to us at LCBC, Les, we had grown to about 600 people and we came to an elders meeting. One of the elders said, he had heard in the hallway the week before something going on in the church that he was surprised by. And it was something really good. I don't even remember what it was, but it was good. But he said, I was surprised. I didn't know about it. And we need to know everything that's going on in this church. Right. And so we spent several months talking through that and said, is it our job to know everything and control everything? Or is it our job to empower people to move it forward? And we landed on kind of what you said. Our job is to empower people, build leaders, let them take it forward. Right. But that was a big discussion for us. And that was about 600 people when that happened. And I think when you get, depending on the leader, but anywhere from 600 to 1,000 people in your church, you start hitting these walls and you have to lead differently.
Right. Yeah. And you're talking about congregation size.
Yes, congregation size. Yeah. And so instead of being the doer, all of a sudden you are building teams of doers. Right. But then you get to that next level of building teams of leaders that are going to be building more leaders to do the work. So yeah, it keeps expanding out.
And what's really important is to recognize that there isn't any one answer to this. There are actually three totally valid responses. And one of them is to say, no, I like that. Actually, that's why I'm here. If I was in the for-profit world, I say to people, you can be king or you can be rich. There's nothing wrong with saying I want to be king, right? I want to waken up on a Monday morning and click my fingers and say, okay, I know we've been a shoe manufacturer, but we're going to make belts from now on, right? For whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, lying to yourself or kidding yourself or subliminating that and trying to, quotes, fake it for scalability, which we'll talk about that in a second or two, is hurtful for everybody. It's far better saying, no, I started this because I want to do this my way. Most people start new ventures, cause-based, faith-based, for freedom and autonomy. They want the freedom and autonomy to do something that they've seen done elsewhere, but not the way they want it. And there's nothing wrong with saying, let's go back to fun. Let's just hold off. Now, in the church world, you've got to balance out with the Great Commission, decide how that works out. But there are plenty of boutique ministries doing something beautifully, wonderfully deep and rich, but staying in the fun world, right?
Yeah.
And that's a
Yeah.
valid response. The second valid response is to say, get it, I get it, I see it, this is going to be tough. You're probably good to get a coach, somebody to help you through it, but I'm going to change what happens in these 4 inches between my ears. I'm going to become that leader. In the for-profit world, I talk to people about making the shift from a founder mindset to a CEO mindset. That's an important distinction. Now, I challenge them if they want to do it. One of the things that they find hardest to do is that when you take founder off your card, because every time you play that founder card, you're pulling it back to the fun mindset. Every time you have founding pastor, if you're trying to get to scale, you're actually, when you make people see you that way, you're pulling it back to the king water
Because
carrier.
you're almost pulling the trump card and saying, because I'm the founder, I have
I
more
have
say
25
in this
votes to your
decision.
1, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the third alternative, and it happens, not often, I'm going to guess here, maybe 15, 20%, but it's a good option, is to say, I agree, we as a church or we as a business, we as an organization, I want us to scale, not just grow. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. I want us to scale. I don't think I have what it takes to make that shift. So why don't we find me a role, right?
Mm.
And, finding, and this is okay. What's that fancy word for people who have a job for life?
Pastor emeritus is probably.
Yes,
Yeah.
wonderful, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And let's get somebody who's got that mentoring, coaching, team development mentality in to really run the business, run the
Yeah.
church.
Yeah. So talk to us then. You hit that Whitewater stage. You decide you're going to try to keep going, or at least my experience is most pastors say, okay, I think I can make this shift. So what are the decisions pretty quickly you've got to make to get through Whitewater?
I used to phrase dirty fingernail activities a while back. The answer is so narcoleptically, sleep-inducingly boring that we risk losing our entire audience. So I'm just going to ask you, everybody who's watching or listening, just hold in here with me. You got to get your org chart right. And it's like, what? We were just having those great leadership discussions, words like vision and org chart. What? Here's what's happening. The church has to move from what has essentially been unitary decision making. Something comes in, I make the decision, we do it. You as a leader / water carrier may have some limited delegated authority, but you have most of the information, you make the decision, you've got to do it. The secret, if there is one, and I think it is, most people don't know this, of getting through Whitewater, no matter what organization you are, for-profit or not-for-profit, is to learn this incredibly boring skill, which is high-quality team-based decision-making. That's what a large organization does really well. High-quality team-based decision-making. Almost every issue anybody who's running a relatively large organization faces is a screw-up on team-based decisions. Because the information was there, right? If something comes in and hits you from left field that nobody ever, coronavirus hits, all bets are off, right? But under a relative steady state that we all work under, you waking up and you have, this thing, somewhere a team didn't do its job right because it didn't have the right information, or the right people weren't on it, or the meetings that they have weren't structured right. And all of that, the machine that makes high quality team-based decisions happen, the foundation of that, like in an F1 car, the chassis at the bottom is your org chart. It's a machine for decision making. And that's where in churches we hit the first problem, because that sounds so impersonal. So impersonal. In a for-profit world, actually the natural response to most business leaders when they're in Whitewater is actually say, I hadn't thought about it, but you're 100% right. We don't know who does what here anymore. Titles are all messed up. Reporting lines are vague or too unvague. With duplication, things are falling between stools. This would be really good. Let's work on there's an element within this, and I want to take a minute to share, because I think it's really important for our church leaders to know. If I'm the church, say I'm Church of Frisbee, in the Whitewater, in the way up through early struggle through fun, the church and the founding pastor or the founding leaders, they're so close. It's almost the same thing, right? Any impact on the founding pastor has a massive impact on the church and vice versa. If you want to scale, one of the things that happens in Whitewater is that your organization, whether it's a church or a business, has got to begin to have its own voice. It's got to have a seat at the table. And that's not you, it's it, right? So what I say to folks is, I'm here at this meeting, and I hear what Jim says, I hear what Paul says, I hear what Jenny says. I need to know, what does the worship pastor need to deliver for me? Not Paul, right? It's the beginning of a thing that I call moving from heads to hats. The way we succeed in fun is heads. People, actual people, couldn't care less about titles, bringing massive discretionary effort, doing the next indicated thing. That's how we win in fun. And that's how it should be. We hit Whitewater, and this complexity is pushing us to make high quality team-based decisions. We got to move away from heads. Not that Jimmy and Paul and Jenny aren't hugely important, and they're still there, but we've got to start talking about the hat they wear, because they won't be here forever. Mm-hmm. And so beginning with our org chart, getting our clear roles sorted out, that's the dirty fingernail work. Yeah. And it's once we get that platform, we can begin to bring back the sort of spontaneous decision making, because it's happening on a strong information and foundation, right? It's a little like this, and I as you can tell, you know me well enough to know, David, when I open this fire hose, you've got to tell me to stop. But it's a little bit like watching, when I grew up, football is everything, still is important to me. And I mean real, like football, what you call soccer, and view as a pretend game.
But have you learned to like our football?
No. I would, if I was a politician, I would have said yes, wouldn't I? I loved it when I was back in the UK. Funny enough, I used to watch it because it was a bit off-centered in the UK.
Yeah,
but I've grown to love my football even more here. Anyway, that's a separate story. Yeah. But it's a little like watching street kids who are really, really good. A world-class footballer, one of the best footballers ever, who nobody's ever heard of because he never played internationally for a big team. It's a guy called George Best, and he grew up literally in the street next to me, literally the next street. And I would occasionally see him. He was just beginning to emerge when I was a kid. But fun is a little bit like watching street urchins play unbelievable, keepy-uppy, and, just doing whatever they want to do and having fun. And Whitewater is like getting into the Premier League or starting the journey to do that. People have got to start to learn their position. You got to start getting the ball to do the work. You got to have a tactic. You've got to have a season-long strategy. We've got to begin to bring some structure here, because you can get 11 of the best street urchins in the world, put them up against the worst professional team anybody knows, and they'll still lose 26-0, right? Yeah. You're moving into scaling. You've got to have that ability to make high-quality team-based decisions over and over and over again, and that means a strong structural foundation.
And that's hard to do, because it's hard to start letting go of your gut feelings and admit that you don't have all the information. And so for me, I don't know that I would ever admit that I couldn't make good decisions. I just would admit that I don't have all the information. Therefore, it's better that we make the decision as a team. But that's a hard thing to do, because ego's involved and trust. I mean, I trust my gut. And so you have to kind of let go of those things. Once you do that, and then we're starting to run low on time here, Les, but once you do that, then you talk about moving into predictable success, which means you're making the decisions necessary to be able to be successful as an organization, correct?
Yes, the apex of if we think of the whole growth curve that we've been talking about as an arc, the lob a ball would take if you tossed it. We've been going up the growth curve, the left hand side. The apex is that stage that I call predictable success, and predictable success is not fun plus. The difference is in fun we're growing and sometimes growing very fast. But it's still, those of us who are watching me will see me, those of you who are listening, I'm making a parabolic arc with my hand. It's a concave growth curve, and there's always a cap. It'll always slow. And the point of slowing is Whitewater, that, we hit that complexity and the growth rate begins to tap out because we can't balance everything. We can't spin all these plates. What happens in Whitewater, if we get the right structural foundation in place, is we come out with the ability to make a concave growth curve, that J curve that we see, that's true scaling. Now the rate of growth is actually increasing. Here, the rate of growth, it starts high, but it decreases. In predictable success, we pick up where we left off, and now the rate of growth can grow. And the reason is we're bringing in the information from this complex environment. It's going where it needs to go, to the right places, being dealt with by the right people in the right way, and high quality team-based decisions are coming out. And one of the things, I get to work around and work with organizations in predictable success. And one of the key indicators, if not the key indicator, is a high degree of ownership and self-accountability of delivering key results at every level in the organization. In fun, and even in Whitewater, you can always go somewhere where there's a group who have still got it and they're still pumping it out and they're making it happen, but it's patchy. Right? Okay. It's not evenly divided. Predictable success, and we've all worked with companies that have been in predictable success. It's like their dominoes are stacked, right? There's this high degree, wide and deep throughout the organization, of ownership and accountability.
So I love this whole concept. Love listening to you talk about this, Les. People can read more by definitely going to your book, Predictable Success. But I'd also challenge everybody, if you go to the website for Predictable Success, you can sign up for, I think you even give a free book, but I could be wrong on that. But I think you can get a free book. But if you go there, sign up for the weekly email. I personally, Les, I think it's the best. There are very few that I open every week and look at your emails, but I love it. You used to do it on Saturday or Sunday. Now you've switched to Thursdays, I believe, or Wednesdays.
Yes.
And I look forward to it every time because it's practical information on how to lead a staff meeting or how to lead your executive team meeting or it's just so practical. And so I love what you put in there. I think it's just real helpful. And so I look at it every day. One other thing I was just going to say to you, and tell me if I'm wrong. I think I've said this to you before, but you never said if I was right or wrong. I think, at least at LCBC, I feel like we hit that Whitewater 4 or 5 times over the course of going from 150 to 22,000 people. And so, and maybe we drift back down. Maybe to your point, you don't go back down to fun, though it felt like once you get through Whitewater, you start having fun again, but you can get pulled back into it. And so I felt like we went through several stages of growth where we had to go through Whitewater again, take away a lot of the complexity, decision making, and then start going again. But is that true? Or once you've got it, you've got it?
No, it's absolutely true. With an important distinction. So and I should say you're absolutely right. You go to my website, predictablesuccess.com, something will pop up and bug you, offering that you can just get the book for shipping. We just charge shipping and we'll ship it out to you because I want to get it out to as many people as possible. I didn't put this in the book because nobody would have got through the first chapter. The reality is that growth cycle, early struggle, fun, Whitewater, into predictable success, there's a mini version of that in each of the stages. So you have the early struggle when you're most at risk. Then there's a fun bit of early struggle where, okay, this is horrible, but I think I work out what's going on. Then you hit a sort of a Whitewater stage, which I'm nearly there, I just got to do the right thing. And the same thing happens in fun. Then when you get to predictable success, you can loop through, as you start new stuff, every new thing you do goes through an early struggle, fun, Whitewater stage. So you can have what I call a Whitewater with small w multiple times. But there's a distinction to be made. Whitewater, capital W, You know it because you're back to having an existential risk. It's early struggle stakes again. If we don't get this right, our lights could be out. That's how you know you're in capital W Whitewater, because this thing's shaking. We have got to fix this. The other Whitewaters, which what I call small W Whitewaters, they're Whitewater feeling. They definitely are, and it's really horrible. But it's not going to put your lights out.
Yeah, interesting. So many other things I'd love to ask you about momentum and what happens if you don't figure out Whitewater and what happens to momentum. The other thing I was just going to ask you real quick, Les, and I probably shouldn't even ask it for sake of time, but some of our pastors step into an existing church, maybe that's been stalled out and hasn't been moving forward. And so what step are they stepping into? What stage are they stepping into? It's not really early struggle because it's already gone, but it's not even fun because it's stalled out. So what stage are they stepping into?
Well, that's the question they've got to find out the answer to. I wouldn't know because I need to sit with them and ask them questions.
Yeah,
But it's almost certainly not early struggle, but it can be any one of the ones that are up here. But here's the thing, you've got to identify it, right? You've got to be able to say, oh, this is a church that's in treadmill, right?
Yeah.
The pastor left because it's going nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And I've made my bones in fun. That's when the problem happens, because you bring the toolkit that worked in fun, it's not going to work in treadmill, or vice versa, which is actually more common. A treadmill, genius, somebody who's really done a great job with a church in treadmill, maybe brought it back to predictable success, brings those tools to a church in fun, going to kill it because it's small. You're going to crush it. So it's really, I'm saying all of this to get the $1.18 I get from selling a copy of my book. You've got to actually be able to work out what stage the church is in. And then you've got to be careful about bringing your toolkit if it doesn't match. I'm not saying don't take the job. I'm saying, understand, you might need to find tools that you don't have right now.
But Les, that's huge, because I think when you find yourself in Whitewater, or even you reach a point where I'm just frustrated with early struggle, whatever it may be, and you decide you're going to move on, there's a tendency to not look at what stage the church is in, and to your point, not have the tools to succeed or be successful in that other stage. So that's gold. That's huge. Thank you so much. I love what you're talking about. I could talk about this all day with you. Appreciate it very much. People can find you at
predictablesuccess.com.
Okay, good. And I would strongly encourage all you guys, if you haven't yet done it, do it. Get the weekly emails. You'll enjoy it very much and benefit from it greatly. Les, thank you. Appreciate you and appreciate the contribution you're making to churches and pastors. It's huge. So thank you so much.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft, and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.